Welcome to One-on-One, the Daily Items weekly digital program featuring Susquehanna Valley newsmakers interviewed by Daily Item reporters. Today's guest is Bucknell University Professor Judy Grisel, interviewed by Rick Dandes.
Up your new car game in March with a new Kia for just $99 a month from Sunbury Motors Kia.
Wanna see you in a Kia. Sunbury Motors Kia.
You heard right. Lease a 2019 Kia Forte LX for just $99 a month for only 24 months. Drive away in a 2019 Kia Soul for only $149 a month. With deals like this, you'll have to hurry in to get in under the buzzer.
Welcome to One-on-One. My name is Rick Dandes, and today we're speaking with Professor Judy Grisel, and she teaches at Bucknell Psychology and Neuroscience. She also happens to be a best-selling author of a book called Never Enough, which has a lot to do with her personal life, but also her research. I think what's interesting, Judy, the first time I saw you speak, which is a couple of weeks ago, was your path to a PhD, professorship, and being an author is pretty unusual. Could you tell me about your early life and how you got to the point where you started doing research on addiction?
Sure, Rick. I took my first drink at 13, and it was a big drink. It was big enough to make me realize how much I liked it. And I spent the next 10 years, so until right after my 23rd birthday, using all the drugs and as much alcohol as I could get my hands on.
Are you from New York?
No, I grew up in New Jersey.
Okay.
And that's where I started, but I finished in Florida at just before my 23rd birthday when I hit bottom. And during that 10 years, I lost everything I cared about. I had been kicked out of 3 schools. I was homeless. My family wouldn't talk to me. I was in trouble with the law. I pretty much hollowed out. And I ended up in treatment, fortunately. And when I was there, I learned that I had a disease and an illness, a brain illness. And my first thought, and one of the things they said about that was, well, you can't use drugs anymore, which seemed absolutely devastating to me because I thought, why live if I can't use drugs anymore?
Did you go cold turkey? I mean, did you?
Well, I did because I was in treatment, and I thought that was going to be like a spa, and it was actually not a spa. It was more like a hospital, and there was a lot of nurses and a lot of talking about feelings and a lot of... It was
group
miserable.
Therapy
Group therapy, the whole 9 yards. But when I learned that I had this problem, I thought problems can be solved. Diseases can be cured. Surely there'll be a way for me to use drugs without self-destructing. And it's really a testament to the persistence of addicts. We don't quit. And even though I had lost so much, I really thought I can fix it. So I managed, despite having a GPA of a little less than 2.0, I think, to finish college and then to go to graduate school. And I wanted to study the mechanisms in the brain that related to, or that influenced people like me to lose control so much. So I thought if I could understand what was different about my brain and someone who wasn't a drug addict, I would be able to fix it.
I'm going to take a step back. How do you muster the strength to say, you said you were at rock bottom. I think you mentioned a story about going to dinner with your father, was it? Mm-hmm. There was a moment, an aha moment, I can't continue, I'm going to die maybe moment if I continue. Is there a moment where you said, okay, I'm going into rehab now, I'm going to stay in rehab, I'm going to beat this? Or,
it wasn't so much strength as it was fear. So I had been so numb. I drank every day, I smoked pot every day, I used everything I could every day, all kinds of pills. And I hadn't really been scared, even though a lot of scary things had happened.
Wow.
So very many scary things. But I was so numbed out. And I guess a couple of weeks, cleaning out my system, and I took a good, honest look at my life, and I got a little scared. I thought, wow, this isn't actually how I planned to live. And I guess it was that fear that made me willing to try it. And I wasn't so, as I said, I was so young, and I really thought,
Yeah.
why couldn't this happen when I'm 40 and my life is over? Now I don't see that as old, but at the time it seemed very old. And so I didn't think it was a great idea to stay abstinent, but I figured, you know what, I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to take all the advice I can get. For 7 years. For some reason, I thought I had used addictively for about 7 of those 10 years.
Wow.
And I'll stay clean and sober for 7 or 10 years. I'll do everything I can. I'll take direction. And then I'll make the decision. And when 7 years came by, I was about 30. By then I was getting my PhD. My life was a zillion times better. And I thought, well, I'll give it another 7.
Well, obviously you were smart. There was
I mean,
some
there's
intelligence there behind the
There's
the
a
numbness.
lot of intelligent addicts who die in the gutter. I feel really fortunate. You know, it's very lethal. It's more lethal than brain cancer, and most of us don't make it. I think a good treatment center helped. I think the fact that my brain was still in the adolescent phase, a little bit plastic, probably did help me. I had support, and I took more support, so I feel really fortunate.
So you opted to go into, rather than maybe psychology, sort of
Yeah.
biology, neurobiology.
Yeah.
What spurred you to go in that direction? I think you maybe mentioned that a few minutes ago. And what have you learned
Yeah.
about addiction?
Well, I'm not very patient. I did it for a short time, think, well, maybe I could help people, more directly this way. But I knew that I wasn't good at listening to people talk about their problems. I couldn't even stand my own. So I thought that I wanted to study the molecular and biological and chemical basis of addiction, because I was sure, as most people are, that there's some source in the brain. And we know, for instance, that it runs in families. And so there's a genetic influence. We know a lot about the neurochemistry of how these addictive drugs interact with the brain. And so I made myself an expert in that with a lot of good teachers. And I've been doing that for almost 30 years, and I don't know the answers exactly, but we do understand a lot about what's different about brains like mine and brains like maybe my brother, who's not an addict.
Is the neurobiology different between someone who smokes marijuana, someone who does coke, someone who's an alcoholic?
Well, there's an addictive personality, for sure. So there's some shared vulnerability that we all have, that people share. So whether it's marijuana, cocaine, or heroin, or alcohol, there's a common substrate. And then they have different attributes too. So for instance, there's some good evidence that people who have a tendency toward ADHD might be self-medicating more with stimulants. Or people who have latent anxiety might be more inclined to find things like alcohol and downers pleasurable. So there's some shared and some unique components, but we know that there are a lot of the neurobiology of those things. Yeah.
I saw a speech at Bucknell maybe a week ago about genomes. I wonder if someday they'll be able to recognize certain genes in people with a tendency towards those types of addictions, and maybe someday be able to even do some gene manipulation. I wonder.
Yeah, that's a scary, interesting thought. I think I plan to do this. I plan to find the genes. I even was right on the cutting edge at a really fabulous giant laboratory in Oregon that was working on genetics of addiction. And this was right at the time the human genome was being cloned, around the turn of the century. And we were all very enthused that we would be able to, we'd know the genome, we'd take 1,000 addicts and 1,000 normal people, compare them, and voila, the genes would pop out.
Do your analytics.
And they did not. So it turns out that it's very much more complicated than we thought. There are probably hundreds of genes, some making it more likely and some making it less likely. And I talk about this quite a lot in the book, but it's there's not a single smoking gun or one really strong genetic component, with a few kind of boring exceptions. There's a liver enzyme that makes some people not metabolize alcohol very well, and they get sick, kind of like they're naturally on antabuse, and so they tend not to drink, but that's not what accounts for most of the difference. So we don't know the genes yet, and there's one idea that if we get enough subjects, we'll be able to parse that dense landscape. But I kind of think that addiction is so complex that maybe there's as many ways to get to it as there are addicts, with a genetic vulnerability and then also a lot of things from the environment contributing. And so perhaps trying to understand the genes is not the most direct way to find a solution.
Very interesting. We'll pick up on this in a few minutes. We're speaking with Judy Grisel, a Bucknell professor.
Up your new car game in March with a new Kia for just $99 a month from Sunbury Motors Kia.
Wanna see you in a Kia. Sunbury Motors Kia.
You heard right. Lease a 2019 Kia Forte LX for just $99 a month for only 24 months. Drive away in a 2019 Kia Soul for only $149 a month. With deals like this, you'll have to hurry in to get in under the buzzers.
Welcome back to One-on-One. We're speaking today with Judy Grisel. And we've been talking about addiction, something that she's researching constantly. And I might say that she's written a book. And it's a bestseller, so congratulations on that. How long did it take you to write this book?
Thank you. Oh, it took a long time, 10 years probably, from start to finish, at least. And partly I was doing other things. I was raising my children. I was teaching classes. I was doing research in the basement of the biology building. So this was kind of a side project. But eventually it got finished, yes.
Okay. Well, congratulations on that. I think the opioid problem is such a massive problem, not around here, everywhere. What have you, I'm saying, is there a cure? Is there a cure, do you think? Do you think someday someone might find a cure for it?
I don't think so.
Explain, please.
Yes. Well, one thing that's important to remember is that drugs have been used by humans since there have been humans, since the beginning of time. It's really a natural drive. What's different is the way we use them now. So we certainly didn't have hollow syringes and super potent synthetic analogs. But we like to change the way we feel. So that's natural. And for that reason, I think we can't really expect to stop drug use. I think that some people are more vulnerable to having that dabbling turn into a habit and then to a compulsion and then to an addiction. And part of the reason for that is certainly a biologic vulnerability, but part of the reason is also the environmental triggers that are so prevalent today. So for instance, stress is one of the main causes of or factors that contribute to drug use and abuse, and we have a very stressful world. I think alienation and loneliness are other big factors, and so for those reasons, I think if there were a cure, it wouldn't be something that happens just inside someone's head. Like, there's sort of a joke, but, you know, if there was a pill to cure addiction, I'd take 2 and drink every day, you know? I think that it's unlikely. I think instead...
So you're talking sociological almost.
I think it's such a hairy problem that it's going to take a really multi-pronged response from all of us. And I think we're all in the boat together. I mean, more and more people, 1 out of 8 adults in the U.S. suffer from a drug abuse problem.
So I think another thing you mentioned a couple of weeks ago was community will have to, it's going to have to be a community.
Yeah, I think addiction at its core is a disease of alienation. And of course, the using of the drugs makes us more alienated from ourselves and our families and each other, our societies. But I think that recovery or the solution has got to be a process of connecting and of caring about each other, of recognizing each other, seeing, the way we're behaving that's different, and kind of reaching out. And one of the things that's hard about that is if you saw me 30 years ago, you wouldn't really want to reach out to me because I was not at all charming.
Yeah.
So I think we know people who seem lost, but there's hope, I think, for everybody. But it's going to really take all of us, I think. And the neuroscience is important. It's an important component of that. But so is education. So is community support.
Where do you see your research going next?
Well, I'm still tinkering in the lab. I'm interested in sex differences, in the vulnerability to becoming addicted to anything, and in binge drinking. I'm also very interested in understanding the genetics of our first response. I think I mentioned at the beginning that the first time I drank, it was transcendent. I loved it. And I think that if you take 100 people and give them, who have never had a drug, and you give them all the same dose, some people love it, some people hate it, and some people are sort of in the middle. And those like me that loved it are much more at risk. So I want to know the genetics of that. And also the other factors. Maybe it's stress, maybe it's my grandparents, epigenetic factors. So I'm interested in understanding what's different that contributes to that initial subjective loving of a drug.
Well, sounds like the subject of your second book.
That would be great if I can get this in
Thank
the
you
lab.
so much. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching One on One. Be sure to tune in next week for another edition.